Welcome to Chai with Manjula. Our guest today is truly a visionary and global leader in the field of sustainable development and one of the world's leading experts on the environment. He is the founder and chairman of the Development Alternatives Group, the premier social enterprise working on issues of sustainable development. The organization has generated 1 million jobs in India, and India today named it one of the 10 most powerful environmental movements in the country. He is co-president of the Club of Rome and president of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. He was the founding director of India's Office of Environmental Planning and Coordination, and also director of the United Nations Environment Program. He was awarded the Stockholm Challenge Award in 2002, the UN Sasakawa Environment Prize also in 2002, and the Schwab Foundation's Award for Outstanding Social Entrepreneur in 2004. Educated at Cambridge and Harvard, he went on to teach Harvard's first undergraduate course on the environment, a course that famously inspired Vice President Al Gore. It is certainly an honor to have Dr. Ashok Khosla on the show. Dr. Khosla, welcome to Chai with Manjula.
Thank you.
I've heard and read a lot about you, and I was so fascinated by the fact that you were always ahead of your time. You taught a course on the environment at Harvard in the 60s, when environment was not even an issue.
That's true.
Then you left for India in around 71, I think, the time when Indians had actually started coming to America.
True. I was going the other way all the time.
Right. And then you started an organization about sustainable development in India way before the economic boom hit the country.
That's true.
And that's your baby, and I would like to talk about that. And I believe that development alternatives is not only about saving the environment, but it's also about eradicating poverty.
Yes, Manjula, in fact, is the other way around. It was set up really to eradicate poverty.
Oh, I see.
And we found that you couldn't do that without reviving the environment, because very poor people, like all of us, depend for a large part of our needs on Mother Nature. And much of what we eat and drink and wear and even make houses with comes from our resource base.
Right.
And so we found that there was no way really to eradicate poverty, to make the life of a very poor woman in a village better without bringing back the water and the soils and the forests. And so I got very much into both because the two are totally related.
Right,
They're
right.
two sides of the same coin.
So now the economic growth in India, how has it affected the poor in the country? Has it helped them or has it left them behind?
Well, you know, if you talk to government officials and World Bank people, they all say that India has a much bigger middle class now, and it's 250 million this or that. And indeed, there is certainly the improvement of lives at the level of people like you and me. Many, many more people can afford many more things, cars, houses, better clothes, better food. But there are still 700, maybe 800 million people who have been left behind, who are less than comfortable and have less than good lives. Their children don't go to school, they don't get enough food, their nourishment is very poor, their health care and their access to resources, but particularly jobs, is extremely difficult. So really speaking, it depends on who you talk to. If you are well off, India is a great place. If you're not so well off, it's probably as hard to live there as anywhere in the world. So I really have devoted most of my work to the lives of poor people, and so I see that end much more. So although my friends often get annoyed with me, I have to say that India is worse off right now than it was before.
Okay. And with poverty, of course, comes the problem of population growth, and it is projected that by the year 2050, India will have the largest population in the world, and the world will have another 3 billion people.
That's right.
So how do you suggest that they control population in India?
Well, the only real contraceptive in this world that works is improving the lives of people. It seems to me that the clearest and shortest way to reach the demographic transition, where both birth rates and death rates come down significantly, is to improve the lives of very poor people as fast as possible.
And how do you do that?
Well, you do that by directing your energies and your policies and your financial resources towards the problem of the poor. At the moment, we've been very good at solving the problems of the rich and making them still richer. Right. But in fact, it's a very misplaced priority because they don't have very many kids. It's the poor who have large numbers of kids, and those are the ones that we have to now bring into the mainstream economy. And whenever you do that, whenever the life of a woman in a village improves, as we've seen over and over again, maybe because of a job, maybe because of other circumstances, her desire for a family goes dramatically down from 5 or 6 children to 1 or 2 children.
Why is it that the poor have more children?
Well, this is because they need them. I mean, they essentially make a calculation, and it's not necessarily an explicit one, of the benefits and the costs of another child. They have to have children for helping them in the fields. They have to have children to look after them in old age. They have to have children to work in the town or city to help bring in money. So there's many reasons why it pays to have children. As soon as you take those reasons away, then people don't want so many children. I don't think I know very many women who really want to have unlimited numbers of children. They basically have them because their mothers-in-law and their husbands and their families force them to have larger families because economically it makes sense to them, particularly for old age and for other things too.
I see. And talking about the economic growth, rapid economic growth usually harms the environment and drains natural resources. Are countries like India and China growing at the expense of the environment? And how can economic growth and environmental health be compatible?
Well, I'm not sure I agree that environment has to be destroyed in order to have economic growth. That depends on the kind of economic growth. If your economic growth depends heavily on using resources and on producing waste, yes, you're going to have very large-scale environmental problems. But growth can come in many different ways. And a well-conceived growth, a sustainable development, if you like, of a country does not necessarily imply major destruction of the environment. It means a different way of doing things so that you get both the environmental values and your improved material well-being. Now, the problem, of course, is that we've conceived of growth as being essentially materials, more cars, more houses, more clothes, more everything, and more roads and more airplanes. And now all of that kind of growth obviously is going to have a large-scale impact on the environment. But it is conceivable to have a very good life with other kinds of approaches, which decouple, if you like, growth from the well-being of both people as well as nature. So we can see that you use more efficient techniques for making houses and infrastructure. You use less materials which are destructive. You use more of your ingenuity, and you use more of your knowledge to do things properly. And some countries, of course, have been able to do better than others.
I see.
The Scandinavian countries, for example, have been able to lead extremely high-quality lives, but their use of their energy and water resources and so on is much more conservative than in many other countries.
I see. Development Alternatives, the organization that you founded and serve as chairman, is a leading organization in the area of sustainable development. Can you tell us about the work that the organization is doing?
Yes, it was set up about 30 years ago, 30 years ago, essentially in response to the problem that we saw afflicting our countries in the South and in the developing world, of extreme poverty and the inability of people to get out of that in the current, in the then prevailing economic systems. Now they're even worse, of course, but in those days already it was hard to see how poor people would be able to get out of the trap that they were in with very bad, poor quality resources, large families, no markets. The whole thing was a vicious cycle and they could never get out. So the purpose of development alternatives was to find root causes and attack them. The root cause of poverty, of course, is the lack of access. The lack of access to land, the lack of access to assets, the productive assets, the lack of access to knowledge and education. And so the poor people are not lazy, they just don't have the same things as you and I have. And our children can basically do a lot better simply because they've got those assets, that capital investment that we put into them in terms of knowledge and education and everything else. So I started Development Alternatives basically to look at how do you jumpstart, how do you essentially make a quantum jump in terms of people's lives by innovation, particularly technical innovation, but also institutional innovation. How do you develop mechanisms for producing and marketing and delivering solutions that people need?
I see.
So we started with major league innovations in the field of housing and water and energy and sanitation, designing new kinds of toilets, new kinds of water systems, new kinds of livelihoods, job-creating systems. For example, this is made out of our handloom machines that we developed. We also make recycled paper and use lots of raw materials which come from industrial wastes into productive things. So we, in a sense, were rethinking development because the poor, of whom, according to the census of the government of India, more than 40 million families needed homes. Now, if you made those homes with conventional techniques, using steel and cement and bricks, there would be no resources left. You would wipe out the whole countryside, and the whole agricultural soil would be turned into bricks, and you still wouldn't have enough homes. So we decided to design new ways to do things using unfired bricks, new kinds of technologies to make new roofing tiles and so on. And those are sold in the marketplace. This is not a charity. We don't believe that by giving away things you're going to create solutions that work.
So you innovate technologies.
And innovate delivery systems. So we innovate technologies for all these things, water and energy and so on. Cooking, for example. Cook stoves were one of our major products because several hundred million women in India suffer this horrible, lung cancer and diseases because of the smoke in the kitchen. And so we wanted to change that. We did that by innovation.
And another very fascinating thing I found was the building that you have created for Development Alternatives, and I would love to hear about it. And recently I found out that it won a national award for the greenest building in the country. So describe the building to us.
You.
How is it
Well, the
different?
President of India gave us an award last Friday to give us the greenest building. It's probably the greenest building in the world today.
Really?
Yes, because it's actually 10 years of its time. It uses virtually entirely recycled materials and unfired, virtually no energy in the building, in the construction of it, and very little energy in operating it. And in a place like Delhi, which reaches temperatures of 112, 115, to have a building that doesn't really need an air conditioner, that's quite a remarkable feat.
How did you do that?
Well, by passive design, by orientation, by the kinds of materials, by opening and closing windows at the right time, and keeping the coolness of the night inside the building, and lots of very interesting ways.
Wow.
But it is possible. We've got cooling systems, but they're very, very low energy cooling systems. So it's a great building. It's a 5-story building plus a basement. And it will house some 350 people. But it's a very high-tech building, and everybody wants to rent space in it. It's actually very beautiful.
Do you give tours of the building?
Oh yes, we're proud of our building, and it's actually becoming a kind of a place of pilgrimage. People want to come and see it because it is different.
Oh. Dr. Khosla, as an expert on the environment, what would you say are the top 5 threats to our planet?
Well, today I think everybody knows about climate change, and this is a threat which comes from the fact that we've been using our fossil fuels, our petroleum and coal and gas, natural gas, to a very large extent, in a profligate kind of way. Okay. So that is certainly a major threat. I think almost as big a threat is the disappearance of many of our species. Third very important threat, which is the oceans. Our fisheries are collapsing. We've wiped out very large numbers of major fisheries on which many people, including very poor people, depend for their protein and so on. But of all the threats, the biggest one of all, in my opinion, is the continued existence of poverty. Poverty is a threat not just to the poor, but also to the rich. Poverty leads to the destruction of certain kinds of resources on which we all depend, including soils and waters, and simply because of the necessity of survival, not because of greed. Poverty leads to alienation and violence and terrorism. Poverty leads to varieties of breakdowns in society and environment. And it seems to me that that is ultimately the really big threat.
I see.
So these are 4, in my opinion, cyclic threats which relate to each other. So it's very difficult in a sense to say which is bigger or smaller because they're all related.
Right.
The 5th threat is the fact that our affairs, global affairs, are determined by what we call the nation state. And every nation and every country and every society seems to think that they have a right to have everything. And this doesn't work on a finite planet. So an infinite need, which is uncontrolled by any kind of coherent decision-making system, imposed on a finite resource base, is a recipe for disaster. So I would say these are the 5 big threats.
Okay, and what are the top 5 adjustments the rich have to make to save the environment and these resources? 5
big things that people in the North, rich people, affluent people, can do is, first of all, to reduce the consumption of material resources, which is really hurting very much. Second is energy. Okay. You have to now really change your methods of energizing. The number of energy slaves that we have to be reduced. Okay. The third is water. The other 2 things that I think the rich can do is start looking at the impact of their actions on poverty and reducing it. Because the most urgent thing from the point of view of the rich, as well as from the point of view of the poor, is to reduce the growth of population. This planet cannot handle 9 billion people. There is no way that by the year 2050, as you said earlier, we're going to have 9 billion people. They won't be able to survive at any reasonable standard of living. So to that extent, I think we've got all to make the most urgent. And it's not a matter of abortions and giving contraceptives. It's a matter of improving the lives of girls. And my feeling is that the most important thing they can do is to support the empowerment of people all over the world, which is not a convenient thing because people get threatened by that.
What are the top 5 organizations related to the environment?
Well, obviously, I'm biased. I work with some of them. So
I work with quite a few.
I think the one in India is the one that, because I designed it, I had the choice of doing whatever I thought was the most important. And I think Development Alternatives, as a social enterprise, not a charity, but a business that works in the field of social and environmental good and makes its work through the marketplace. I think that's a good one. The World Conservation Union, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, is the largest scientific organization working on biodiversity. I think that's extremely important. I work with the Club of Rome, and our work has really goes back 40 years. And our first book, Limits to Growth, was probably the most important starting point for the environmental movement. Yes. It was read by large numbers of people, and it impacted thinking around the world in a way that only a nuclear explosion would do. And so it's been extremely important. I would say there are organizations that we need to nurture, which are not performing well enough, like the United Nations. The whole United Nations system is important for the world, and I hope that we can do much more with it. And I suppose I would say that ultimately civil society, NGOs, the people who don't get voluntary organizations that don't get paid but do good things as a group are very important. So those are my 5 favorites.
All right. And which country would be considered a model of success in developing sustainably?
Frankly, very few. In fact, I would have said almost none, except for one. And it's a tiny little country. It's a country that neighbors mine, and it's a phenomenal commitment to sustainability, because it's sort of a Buddhist country which decided that development means human development and not simply material development. And that's Bhutan. I'm very impressed, and I spent some time there this year, and I must admit it was the most amazing experience I've ever had, where people are actually totally committed to improving their lives without hurting nature. And one of the indicators that they have in there, they don't measure gross domestic product. GDP, GNP is not important to them. What is important is gross national happiness. Okay. And one of the indicators of happiness, for example, is how much time they get to pray. So these are people who have decided a totally different path to human fulfillment. And I think it's wonderful.
Which is the best book on the environment that you would recommend people read?
There are many books, and you can find them. My 2 favorite recent books are actually 2 books that we commissioned in the Club of Rome. The first is called The Factor of 5, Factor 5 book, which is available from most online stores. Factor 5 shows you how to live better with fewer resources. Okay. Factor of 5, less resources. And the other one is The Blue Economy. The Blue Economy is this one here. It's about innovations derived and inspired by nature. All right. How to use nature to do your work for you without paying for it. And it's the way of creating literally tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of jobs for people that are fulfilling and good and rewarding.
Dr. Khosla, what is your message for our viewers, especially for people out there who think that climate change and global warming are media hype or things blown out of proportion? What would you like to tell them?
Well, I would say that in the case of climate change and species extinction, the media are underplaying it. They're not hyping it. They're actually not reporting how bad things are. So I would say that you have to tell your viewers that they're going to be responsible. And the measure of their responsibility is how they think they're going to leave a world behind for their next generation that is unlivable unless they change.
So we have to change the way we think, we live, the way we use resources.
And our value systems.
Okay, on that note, Dr. Khosla, thank you so much for coming by and making time for this. I appreciate it very much, and I'm sure our viewers will find it very informative.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
We have another guest, Anu Mehal, who is the U.S. Goodwill Ambassador for Development Alternatives. She's also a CEO and co-founder of Platinum Organics, a private label manufacturer of apparel and home furnishings, and a board member of El Camino Hospital here in the Bay Area. And of course, a wife and mother too. Anu, welcome to Chai with Manjula.
Thank you so much, and thank you for making time for us.
Well, thank you for introducing me to Dr. Khosla. He's a true visionary, and he has an amazing and unique way of presenting problems and solutions related to sustainable development. And I believe he's your inspiration, he's your mentor. So tell us about your involvement with the organization Development Alternatives and the work that it's doing.
Well, like I said, thank you, first of all, for giving us an opportunity to come, and this is a great platform, and I'm glad that you're doing a wonderful work sharing with people about all the different non-profits. Dr. Khosla is not just my mentor, but millions of people think of him in that space. His work essentially is, well, one would say is that it is not very sensational work, and it's proactive work. So, and these days in the media, any kind of a sensationalism gets publicized quite a bit. And actual work and that Gandhian policy or philosophy that be the change that you want to see in the world, this is what Dr. Khosla is doing. And I met him and was really inspired to see the recycled paper products which are used in very large scale hotels, in a lot of different industries. And the work, when people think about this kind of work, they think that maybe it is used in small places, but it's extremely productive work, and one would be very proud to be using it in US or any other place in the world.
I see. So tell us, how can people get involved with Development Alternatives? How can they support it over here, and what's your contact information if they want to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. The best way of contacting, at least to read about his work, is www.devalt, which is DEVALT.org. And you have my information, which is my email address and phone number, which I'm sure that you will share with the audience. But I would again say that this work is extremely important work, and it is really not a very tedious or boring work. He's actually a rock star in a lot of people's minds.
I see.
It just is that this work requires some serious concentration, and I am very glad that you gave us this opportunity today to share our thoughts with you.
My pleasure, and I wish you all the best with your work
Thank
for
you so much,
Development
Manjula.
Alternatives.
Thank you.
Nice having you here.
Thank you.
That's all we have for you today. Earlier, our guest was Dr. Ashok Khosla, Chairman of Development Alternatives, who is also known globally as the Green Crusader. The organization innovates and delivers eco-solutions that reduce poverty and regenerate the environment. It also influences and spearheads major policy changes that promote sustainable development and empowerment of the marginalized. Dr. Khosla's message and analysis as an expert on the environment are crystal clear. Global warming, climate change, and depletion of natural resources are real and a major threat facing the world today. And responsibility lies with each one of us in the developed world to save the planet by changing the way we live, the way we consume resources, especially energy. You may watch this show again at chaivithmanjula.org. Thank you all for joining us. I'll be back with another inspiring story about giving and people making a difference. For Chai with Manjula, I'm Manjula Gupta. See you next time.